Tonight, the minimum wage is increased 55%, but is it enough? Professor of Finance Dr. Yalçın Karatepe will break that down. Istanbul's mayor is still under fire by the Ministry of Interior, and 103 retired Navy admirals tried for collaborating to undermine the Constitution have been acquitted. I am Murat Tursan, and this is This Week in Turkey. Our main story tonight, the minimum wage has been increased from 5,500 liras to 8,500 liras. President Erdogan gave the good news yesterday. But the news wasn't good enough for everyone. The Confederation of Turkish Trade Unions, or Turkish, boycotted the announcement of the minimum wage as it had fallen 500 liras short of their bottom line. Turkish is one of the oldest and largest trade unions in the country and is usually consulted on minimum wage matters, and is usually a part of the three-way negotiations between the government, employers, and employees. Although there is no legal requirement for Turkish to sign off on the minimum wage, they usually get a seat at the table, but not this time. However, the Confederation of Employers appears to be content with this minimum wage decision, as the representative was present in the announcement. The last time the three parties were able to come to an amicable decision was last year in June, when the minimum wage was increased from 4,250 liras to 5,500 liras mid-year amidst the utterly mind-boggling inflation Turkey has been suffering from. The latest government numbers are hovering around 85% annual CPI, but independent research group ENAG has it closer to 170%. So if the trend persists, that January wage will amount to pennies in a few months. However, President Erdogan is nothing if not pragmatic. In his speech, Erdogan stated that their next year inflation projections were between 20 to 30%, and if that doesn't come to fruition, they are prepared to make a mid-year hike, much like back in June. Now, looking at the political aspect of this, was this a wise decision by Erdogan? According to 2020 data by Social Security Institution of Turkey, 42% of workers in Turkey earn minimum wage, a staggeringly high number. In comparison, in the European Union, the highest proportion of minimum wage earners are in Slovenia at 15%. And surely, it would stand to reason that an insufficient minimum wage could cost Erdogan votes in the upcoming elections. So, is the minimum wage enough to survive on? Are Erdogan's inflation projections realistic? What is his election strategy, and how do we get to this crushing hyperinflation anyway? We asked Professor of Finance Dr. Yalçın Karatepe earlier in the day, and he will be on with us in just a little bit to break it down. But let's get the details first and see what minimum wage earners had to say about the latest hike.
President Erdogan announced a minimum wage for 2023 yesterday. The president was joined by the Minister of Labor and Social Security and the president of the Turkish Confederation of Employers, Özgür Burak. However, the representatives of the Confederation of Turkish Trade Unions, or Turkish, one of the largest trade unions in the country, were notably absent as they boycotted the announcement. The new minimum wage is 8,500 liras, or $455, starting at the end of next January. Turkish president stated that they wouldn't be involved in any negotiation if their bottom line of 9,000 liras weren't met. However, this isn't out of the ordinary, as, for 44 years, the triad of government, employers, and workers have only been able to agree 3 times, the latest being last year when the government doubled the minimum wage. The president gave a speech prior to the announcement seemingly aimed at managing expectations, saying, "We are determined to reduce inflation to 20 to 30% by the end of the year. We want everyone in our country to make their calculations according to this goal. If we encounter an unforeseen scenario, however, we will not hesitate to make an interim adjustment just like last year." Medyascope's own Ibrahim Yayan was on the street to see what the minimum wage earners had to say about the latest increase.
Güzel zam yaptılar ki nereye harcayacağımızı bilmiyoruz. Ciddi olarak söylüyorum yani. O 8,5 milyon maaşı alsınlar. Kendileri kira, elektrik, su, doğalgaz versinler yeterli. Ben dün 4 tane ilaç aldım 80 milyon. 4 tane ilaç sigortalayıp 80 milyon para verdim. 8,5 milyonla nereye geçiniyorsun hemşerim? Nereye geçiniyorsun? Bir tüp olmuş 400 milyon. Evimde hiç kimse yok. 2 kişi çalışıyoruz. Gene yetmiyor. 300 milyon elektrik faturası geliyor her ay. 8,5 milyon ne? Para mı 8,5 milyon? Ben şimdi kalayım paramı, maaşımı. Eve bir kuruş para kalmıyor.
Eve gidene kadar bitiyor para. Aldığın maaş hiçbir şeye yaramıyor sana. Yani isterse 10 bin lira olsun.
Çok kötü. Yani 5 bin, 6 bin liradan aşağı ev kirası yok. Bir evi taşıyorum desen 30-40 bin lira para harcaman gerekiyor. 30-40 bin lira. Bence en az 12 bin lira falan olmalı bu. Abartmıyorum ama yani en azından kiranın 2 katı olmalı. Yani zaten uçtu. Hani 1500 lira olan bir ev 6 bin lira oldu. Asgari ücrete 2 bin lira gelmiş gelmemiş. Zaten onu markete bırakacağız yarın.
En azından bence iyi oldu. Buradan. Tamam yine az ama hayat şartlarına göre yine her şeye zam yapacaklar. 5,5'dan da 8,5 oldu yani. İyi değil mi yani? Bence iyi yani. Hükümeti seviyoruz.
Eyvallah.
Evet.
Çok bile verdiler. Yemin ediyorum beklendi. Biz %3'te %10'ları aldığımızı biliyoruz. %4 zam çok iyi.
İyi.
Çok iyi abi ya. Yani ben de şaşırdım yani. Ama yaranamazsın. Ne olacak?
Zam yapmasın.
Yok yani.
Her şeye zam yapmasın. Asgari ücret de yerinde dursun. Kim istiyor asgari ücreti?
%55'i siz nasıl buldunuz abi?
Ha?
%55'i siz nasıl buldunuz abi?
Ya buldun da ne alacak yine? Bir ay sonra bir zam hepsi gidecek.
Joining me now, Professor of Finance and Ankara University Dean of Political Science Faculty, Dr. Yalçın Karatepe. Doctor, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure for me.
Pleasure's all ours. And Doctor, I'd like to start out with the basics. Now, people appear to be split on the minimum wage decision. However, it is inescapable that many don't think that this was a sufficient increase given the staggering inflation numbers. Now, President Erdogan has stated that by next year they're looking to curb inflation down to 20 or 30%. What is your take on the situation? Was this enough? Will it be enough? And do you think Erdogan's inflation projections are realistic?
Unfortunately, the new minimum wage is not enough. I am saying it is not enough because when we look at the data in detail, we can clearly see that it is not enough. The Turkish, which is one of the largest labor union in Turkey, publishes a hunger level income on a regular basis in Turkey. At the end of November, it was at 7,785 Turkish lira. I am expecting that that amount will increase by 5% in December and another 5% in January, probably, because the prices are going up, especially the food prices are increasing higher than the average inflation rate in Turkey. So by the time the new minimum wage is received by the labor or the employees at the end of January, it will still be below the hunger level income, which I expect to be around 8,650 liras, and new minimum wage is 8,500 liras. So by just looking at numbers, we can easily say that this is not enough for people to survive in Turkey during this high inflation. This minimum wage is causing people to stay below poverty level for the following year, as far as I can see.
I see. And do you believe that the president's 20 to 30% inflation projections are realistic at all? Do you think Turkey can actually attain that?
It is not realistic at all. Probably by the end of 2023, we will see inflation somewhere around 35 to 40%. That's what I'm expecting. So it is higher than what the central bank and the president is expecting to have at the end of 2023. But we will end the year with a higher inflation. So this will cause people to lose more purchasing power, even with the new minimum wage that was declared yesterday to be around 8,500 liras.
I see. And Doctor, one can't help but think that this decision might have an effect on the upcoming elections. Why do you think Erdogan would go this route, in your opinion?
I watched the president's speech yesterday when he declared the new minimum wage. During his speech, he said, if there will be a need, we can increase it in the new year. Probably they will make some new increases in the minimum wage just before the election in order to influence the people's expectations or their behavior towards the election. So it is very likely that we will see a higher minimum wage than 8,500 liras before the elections. So by just looking at that explanation, we see that the main point of president is not to increase the welfare of the working people. It is more focused on affecting their perception, so that when they go to the ballot box to cast their votes, they would vote for the government for increasing the minimum wage just before the election. So this is a strategic move, not an economic or not a move that foresee people to be in a better economic situation, as far as I can see.
I see. And Doctor, I'd like to end on something a little more broad. Now, we've seen an increase in inflation all over the world this year. The U.S. at its peak was around 8%, I believe, and the EU has seen up to 11%. But nobody is suffering from inflation quite like Turkey. Why is Turkey's inflationary crisis so uniquely terrible, in your opinion?
It is terrible because of the wrong monetary policy. Turkey has systematically lowered the policy rate from 19% to 9.5% last month. So when you decrease the policy rate, it's expected that would cause the inflation to go higher. And that's what has happened in Turkey. Yes, the US has an inflation somewhere around 7.5% and 8%. EU has less than maybe 10% on average, the inflation rate. And we have more than 85%, which is like 10 times higher than the US inflation rate. The main reason is not the cost increases in commodities like petroleum or natural gas or some other commodities, because those increases affect inflation all over the world. And their effect is limited in the US to have maybe less than 8% inflation and less than 10% on average in EU. So why did we end up with 85% inflation? This is mainly due to the wrong monetary policy. Turkish President Erdogan has insisted that in order to decrease inflation, you need to decrease the policy rate. And that's what they did. By decreasing the policy rate, they caused inflation to go out of control and reach 85%. The first effect of lowering interest rate showed on exchange rates. If you remember, last year during this time, the US dollar, euro, and other currencies were going off the roof. US dollar was more than 18 liras per dollar. That increase was very high. And the devaluation of Turkish lira caused inflation to go higher, and we end up with 85% inflation. So the main reason why we are having an inflation rate that's not seen anywhere in the world is because of the wrong monetary policy.
I see. And Doctor, one final follow-up question. Now, yesterday we were expecting the central bank's monetary policy rate decision, and they actually kept it at 9%. Does that give you hope at all that the future monetary policy rates will be still at 9% and stable, or do you think that they're going to continue to cut the rates?
Well, the central bank last month mentioned that they will not change the policy rate towards the election. Probably by the time the policy rate will still be at 9%, 9.5%. So they will not decrease the policy rate further, as far as I can see. That's what the central bank has already said. So yesterday, nobody was expecting any change in the policy rate, and central bank didn't change it. So it was in parallel what the markets were expecting from the central bank to do. So the policy rate will stay at this level for the probably next 4 or 5 months, unless there is an unexpected event or economic situation arise. But as far as I can see, the pulse rate will be at the same level until the election.
I see. Doctor, thank you for breaking that down and shining a light on it. I appreciate you coming on. Dr. Yalçın Karatepe, thank you for your time.
Well, I thank you. Have a good day.
And more in domestic news, the Ministry of Interior will simply not let go of the main opposition party, CHP's Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu. Last week, we covered Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu's ban from politics, which you can find down in the description. But in short, the mayor has been convicted to about 2.5 years in prison, which he will probably not serve, but more importantly, a lifetime ban from politics. And his crime, of course, was speech. See, you can't just say anything you want in Turkey. Insults are considered a crime, particularly insulting government officials. People go to jail over tweeting about Erdogan. But this one is more about the Minister of Interior, Süleyman Soylu. To many, he is AKP's number 2. Süleyman Soylu calls İmamoğlu a fool. İmamoğlu says something to the effect of takes one to know one, and İmamoğlu goes down. It's more complicated than I'm making it out to be, but that's what the link in the description is for. But fast forward to this week, 2 things happened. The Ministry of Interior is now investigating İmamoğlu for harboring terrorists within the ranks of the city staff. And İmamoğlu first hints at running against Erdogan, then backpedals. See, after the decision was handed down last week, İmamoğlu held a giant rally at City Hall, and he mentioned 2023 elections a lot, which prompted many to ask if İmamoğlu was going to announce his candidacy soon. Because in any other country 6 months away from a historic election, we would already know the candidates, but this is Turkey, so we don't. We're not even sure of the exact date of the election yet. And at this point, everything is up in the air. So it was a little exciting earlier on in the week when İmamoğlu said, using a lot of sports terminology, that he might be running against Erdogan. Well, later on, he backed off of that, saying Kilicdaroglu was the man to look out for, his party boss. And this is all happening as the Ministry of Interior is pursuing yet another investigation into İmamoğlu. Looks like the mayor's woes are far from complete. Let's go to the details.
Last week, Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu was found guilty of insulting public officials and hit with a 2-year, 7-month sentence and banned from politics for life. İmamoğlu was previously under investigation for allegedly disrespecting the tomb of Sultan Mehmet the Conqueror and allegedly harboring members of terrorist organizations within the city ranks. Both investigations were opened by the Ministry of Interior, headed by Süleyman Soylu. İmamoğlu was investigated for walking along the tomb with his hands behind his back, which the ministry saw as an insult. İmamoğlu struck back at the heavier allegations of harboring terrorists yesterday during a City Hall meeting and said, "As of yesterday, a fabricated terrorism investigation has been referred to the prosecutor's office. A few days ago, the minister said, 'If this happens or that happens, I will dismiss the mayor.' I will not be dismissed. What arrogance is this? What nonsense is this?" Preceding İmamoğlu's ban from politics last week, İmamoğlu held an impromptu rally in front of City Hall, drawing crowds of tens of thousands of people. The size of the crowd and İmamoğlu's mention of the 2023 elections immediately drew speculation on if he intended to run against Erdogan and the generals next year. İmamoğlu was polling outstandingly favorably against Erdogan, beating him in 27 out of 30 polls. İmamoğlu further fanned the flames on Tuesday when he spoke to Habertürk's Fatih Altaylı, saying, "I am on the team opposing Erdogan. Whether or not the coach will let me play is up to him. I won't be making that decision, but there is a chance that I will be on the field." However, İmamoğlu backed off of his earlier comments later, announcing that the party boss Kilicdaroglu would be the opposition's candidate. You are all used to watching a one-man show. You all forget about team play. I am talking about a team effort. Our nation has forgotten team effort because they have been watching a one-man show for years. so they cannot comprehend team play. I am telling you, I am a team player. I am a member of CHP. Like any other CHP member, my candidate is Kilicdaroglu, who is the father of our family.
And this week, in a surprising turn of events, 103 admirals have been acquitted of charges relating to collaborating to undermine the Constitution. This is a veiled way of saying attempting a coup. See, Turkey is no stranger to military coups. There have been at least 7 coups attempts in the last 62 years, and 3 of them have been successful. But there have been also 4 military memorandums. That is less like a coup and more like the military handing the government a list of demands and saying, "Don't test me." These coups or memorandums have typically been directed towards Islamist governments. Famously, the 1997 military memorandum dissolved Erdogan's old party, the Islamist Welfare Party. And now that Erdogan is in power, he's extra careful about the military, though he is thought to mostly have the military under control by now. But this is largely about something else. See, the 103 admirals released a memorandum condemning President Erdogan's mega project that seeks to cut a secondary artificial canal through Istanbul. Canal Istanbul seeks to turn the European side of the city into an island and create an artificial strait. The stated purpose of the canal is to minimize the environmental risk associated with large ships, particularly oil tankers, passing through the narrow strait. And Turkey could theoretically charge money for the passage of the ships through its artificial canal, something it cannot currently do. But the critics of the project say that it has more to do with circumventing the Montreux Convention, the 1936 international agreement that allows Turkey to govern the passage of ships through the straits. According to the convention, Turkey must allow civilian ships to pass through the strait. No questions asked, no fees collected. Military ships, however, are subject to certain restrictions, and during times of war, no foreign military ship may pass the straits unless Turkey is involved in the war, which keeps Turkey out of conflicts that it wants nothing to do with. But the admirals felt that Erdogan's canal would undermine the convention. Thus, the admirals wrote a memorandum critical of the canal. Big mistake, because as previously stated, Erdogan doesn't really like memos coming from military brass. So earlier this year, the admirals were rounded up and had to stand trial, but now all have been acquitted. But what did they write that landed them in hot water with the government in the first place? Here are the details.
103 retired Navy admirals charged with collaborating to undermine the Constitution have been acquitted. However, according to the reporting from Anadolu Agency, the Ankara Public Prosecutor's Office will be appealing the decision. If convicted, the admirals could potentially have faced up to 12 years in prison. The 103 admirals were detained last year for releasing a memorandum that defended the Montreux Convention regarding the regime of the Straits, which President Erdogan's mega-project, Canal Istanbul, threatens to circumvent. The court has ruled that the memorandum did not constitute a crime. The admirals published the memorandum back in April of last year after the Speaker of the Parliament, Mustafa Şentop, was asked a hypothetical. If President Erdogan could withdraw from the Human Rights Convention, could he also withdraw from the Montreux Convention if he so chose? Where Şentop responded, technically, he could. Upon Şentop's remarks, the admirals penned the memorandum stating, "The Turkish Straits are one of the most important waterways in the world and have been managed according to multinational agreements throughout history. Montreux, which is the last of these treaties and protects Turkey's rights in the best way. Montreux is a contract that prevents Turkey from unintentionally entering the war on the side of one of the warring parties in any war. It allowed him to maintain his neutrality in World War II. The memorandum also criticized the armed forces for not taking a harder stance against Canal Istanbul, saying, "For these reasons, we condemn the efforts of the Turkish armed forces and naval forces to deviate from these values and move away from the contemporary route drawn by Ataturk, and we oppose it with all of our being."
And with that, that's it for us in This Week in Turkey. I have been Murat Tursan. A special thanks to Mehmet Tanverdi and Kathleen Phelps for helping me out with the show. And of course, as per usual, a special thanks to you for joining us. Have a good night and a good weekend.